Well, it's finally been a full year with 3E43, and after 10,000 miles, I want to go over with you everything that you need to know about owning a retired used taxi vehicle. Going through the logbook here, I bought the car with 187,700 miles on the clock. That was February 1st of 2022. Today, February 8th, 2023, I have 197,020 miles on the odometer. That means that in the 10,000 miles I've put on this vehicle, this is what I've had to put into it. And frankly, it's a bit shocking. I think one of the things that people need to realize is that if you are buying a used cab, the simple fact of the matter is it's going to be an abused car. There's going to be a lot of wear and tear. There's going to be a lot of parts that you're going to need replacing. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you're going to look at and you're going to say, ooh, this is really bad. For example, when I bought this car, I had 4 used tires on it, all from different date codes, different tread wear, and it was really just a mess. You're going to notice stuff like your wind deflectors are going to be put in with tapping screws. You're going to have scuffs, scrapes, bumps, different paint colors, different shades of yellow. And you know, for me that's fine because that's everything that I wanted in the taxi cab. It's part of its character, it's part of its authenticity. But if you're going to be buying one and you're expecting a cream puff, that's just not the reality of the situation. In fact, even this car, which had needed very little during its time in service, when I got it, needed huge amounts of work done to it. And we'll go through that right now. In the service log, we can see that on the 1st of February 2022, I bought the car for $1,100 cash. It had 187,400 miles on it. And within the first day of ownership, I got it transferred and titled and the transmission seized. Yeah, it turned out that this car had a bit of a transmission issue when I bought it. I knew that going into it, but I didn't expect it to fail within the first 20 miles of my ownership. So, you know, I bought it February 1st, and February 2nd, it was already in the driveway looking for a tow truck. The simple fact of the matter was that the torque converter, I believe, seized in full and pretty much prevented the car from going forward, neutral, reverse, anything. The drive shaft was so locked up that it wouldn't even allow me to shift into neutral to get the car onto the flatbed. We had to tow it on and drag it onto the flatbed. But I was able to source a P71 transmission for the car for $500. Plus I have a guy in town that can do it for me for $400 installed. So it cost about $900 for a new transmission to be installed. Now, when you have a transmission for one of these cars, please note that you can't just put in a P71 or a P7B transmission in directly, because the tail shaft housings are different compared to the civilian model and the taxi model. Therefore, what we had to do, unfortunately, when doing this car, was cut the drive shaft, tail shaft yoke about 3 inches with a Sawzall for it to fit. And the fact of the matter is, trying to find drive shafts for one of these cars is getting increasingly difficult, considering the rarity and the fact that Ford no longer has production for these. So I got the car back from the transmission shop in March, and I drove it another about 300 miles or so, and I brought it to one of the Ford dealers local to me to get the steering column fixed, which was a recall that was issued in 2013 that was never addressed during the time that it was in use as a taxi cab. So when I got that addressed, drove the car, it was fine. However, by the time I got it back to my place of work, I realized that the vehicle was suffering from what looked like an overheating symptom. It had cooling issues, the temperature gauge was spiking, and the fans were on full. Turns out that the heater transfer pipe in the back of the engine had sprung a leak, leaking out all of its coolant and causing the car to overheat in the process. So I did have to tow it back to my house, and that was $150 for the tow, where we later found out that the vehicle was going to need a complete cooling system overhaul. So in April, after the car was parked for a couple of days, we went in and we just redid the entire cooling system with Rock Auto parts. We put a new heater pipe in, new intake manifold gaskets. It turned out the intake manifold was good. We put a new thermostat, upper hose, spark plug, PCV valve, plug boot, seal, and then did a coolant flush and clean. I did take it out on a test drive after that, and it was still overheating. And so we went back and put it on the drawing board and found out that the car also needed a water pump. Turns out that water pump that was in there, as you can see by the photos that I'm going to show, was completely destroyed. Since the thing looked like a Shuriken Star instead of a water wheel, it turned out that we later found out that the car had really never had a real coolant flush done. It was just added, the coolant was just added to it, and we found out that that was what was causing a lot of the corrosion, because there was so many heat cycles in the vehicle and things that just eventually caused the water pump to degrade so badly. And frankly, I don't understand how the car survived with that much damage. In fact, it's everything short of a miracle how the car was able to be driven to my house and driven for quite a while before I even realized that such a problem had occurred. After doing the water pump, the next thing on the list was brakes. The brakes were very thin, both front and rear. So what we had to do was we installed front pads at 189,300 miles. The roof light was replaced because of the amount of duct tape that had been put on the old roof light to make it look like it still had a roof light on it. So I had to put a new roof light on it. That was $130. And we also installed another lower radiator hose because we did another coolant flush after installing the water pump, a few weeks after doing the water pump, to flush out the system again to get rid of all that rust. Unfortunately, that isn't everything. The next week, I drove it up to a show in New Canaan, Connecticut, and while driving up on the Merritt Parkway, had found out that my alternator had died. It turned out that on the Merritt Parkway, there is no shoulder, so we had to limp it all the way to New Canaan on just the battery, and it sputtered and died just as we arrived at the car show. Thankfully, there was a Napa auto parts store open. It was $216 for a new alternator, and since the alternator is so easy to get into, all we needed to do was about 45 minutes, and we were able to do it with basic hand tools and get my car back home. The next few jobs were, again, more basic maintenance that had just been deferred for so long. On July 2nd, 2022, we did the brake hose for the right front because there was a leak. The rear shock absorbers were replaced, and its second oil change was performed at about 190,000 miles. Now, the rear shock absorbers are very interesting because there is actually a bit of a difficulty trying to find that type of part on Rock Auto. Rock Auto doesn't list the P7A as a car as an option pack in their database. You will see it listed as a taxi model, but nothing that corresponds to the VIN P7A. So trying to find parts that are correct can be a little bit difficult at times. Thankfully, we were able to find rear struts or rear shocks that came from Gabriel, and those fit pretty much right on and didn't have too much of an issue. What we then did was, on the 4th of July, I had the vehicle, I sort of did it myself. I did a paint correction, buffed out the paint, and cleaned up some of the really dirtiness and grittiness of the car, and I was able to make it look surprisingly quite a bit better because under all that dullness was actually a very good paint job, except for the fenders and the front bump header panel where there had been a prior accident. July 16th, we did a little bit more work. We did the right front control arm bushings for the upper control arm. We did strut assemblies for the left and right, and we did the right front lower control arm ball joints, as well as the left and right sway bar links. That was actually about a 20-hour job due to the amount of rust that was on the vehicle. Despite having a lift, it still took roughly 16 to 20 hours of labor just to get all the bolts off. The next week, we also removed the left lower control arm ball joint and replaced it, as that was going bad. And then in between the week of the 16th and the 23rd, I also installed some new Michelin tires on there, had them mounted and balanced. The 24th, we had the AC accumulator replaced and all the AC system completely looked over, including new O-rings, hoses, and they were cleaned, charged, and tested for vacuum. And then we also put another set of new tires 2 months later for the rear. And outside of that, we have just needed to do anything but basic oil changes. So the simple fact of the matter is, it is still a Crown Victoria, so parts are going to be cheap, parts are going to be readily available, and the car itself is going to be fairly reliable. However, what you're going to notice is that there's going to be a lot of deferred maintenance from buying a New York City cab, because what you're trying to do is just get as much money, what you're trying to do is make as much money with the cab as you can, not make it the best experience for the rider. So in that sense, it has been, I believe, totaled up, it has been about $2,500 worth of work put into the car, which means I'm in it for about $4,000 right now, which isn't terrible, considering that most P7Bs at this point are well above the $4,000 mark for anyone that is considered in relatively good shape. Outside of that, all we've had to do is really just small cosmetic stuff. I've added the TV back in for the taxi system. I put the meter back in. I put the credit card machine back in. I replaced the roof light and just given the car a general once over. But outside of that, there really haven't been too many issues with the car. So again, to reiterate, the issue is going to be deferred maintenance. And that's something that you're going to want to keep an eye out for. And sometimes you can't keep an eye out for when you're out on the lot and looking at the car because, well, sometimes stuff doesn't rear its head until it's a little too late. But I wouldn't say that it is as terrible an abuse as many people make it out to be. If you find a car that's been relatively well maintained throughout its whole life, it's going to treat you well. If you found a car that's been abused since day one, steer clear and just avoid. Well, thank you so much for watching. I'm Nathaniel. Thank you for sticking with me with 3E43's journey. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.